Throughout the game's lifespan, characters tend to get a reputation, and then that reputation sticks by the character until the end of their meta relevance. So people tend to not really change their opinion of a character much, leaving some to be more underrated than they deserve to be. So what are some of Wuthering Waves' most underrated characters? Now let me make one thing very clear. Just because I mention a character doesn't mean that everyone thinks they're bad, or everyone thinks that they're mid, or whatever. It just means that the majority of the community, or at least those that I have seen, thinks that the character is worse than they actually are. This is based on general community opinion and does not apply to everyone. There's plenty of people who realize how good some of these characters are. With that out of the way, it's time to talk about some of the most underrated characters within WuWa, with the first character I wanted to talk about being Yangyang. Now Yangyang is a character that even I have been caught disrespecting, but this was because a lot of us simply did not see the potential in her yet. Because Yangyang is a character that most people didn't pay much mind to the second that they read her kit. They saw some grouping, which was theoretically nice but not that useful in WuWa's endgame content, and then some energy restore, which unfortunately had to compete with a minimum of 23% damage amplification on other characters' outro skills. So Yangyang wasn't generally seen as a strong character, but this all changed in 1.4 when people started realizing just how fast her rotation is. Now initially this was seen as just swap cancel nonsense, but this isn't actually the case. You can easily do a rotation where you start with the intro skill, do a heavy attack, skill, ult, and then jump and plunge, and that's just your full concerto meter right there. Yangyang has one of the fastest rotations in the entire game, which makes her an incredible character if the character in question that you're trying to play her with doesn't have many buffers, like for example Carlotta. Yangyang is actually Carlotta's best free-to-play option. Her rotation is around the same length of Sanhua, and they both have an S6 that gives attack percent and they can both run Moonlit. However, their outro skills is where they differ, because Sanhua gives basic attack damage amp, which is kind of useless for Carlotta, but Yangyang, she gives energy. And because so much of Carlotta's damage is coming because of her ultimate, getting energy on her is extremely important. And Yangyang being able to give energy through her outro skill gives her this little bit of utility with ult-based characters that Sanhua could not replicate because she has no form of energy restoration within her kit that applies to other resonators. And I know a lot of people that are going to talk about Lumi and Taocha when it comes to Carlotta, but they have longer rotations than Yangyang, and because you need to run energy regen on your Carlotta with them, it ends up ultimately being worse than just running Yangyang. And because Yangyang is able to group, it means that she's also a very solid character to use in Whimpering Wastes. Now moving on to the second character, being yet again a character whose strength comes from the fact that their rotation is just so quick. And if you're reading the chapters, you already know it would have to be Sanhua, and she has way more up her sleeve than just the fact that she has a very short rotation. I already talked a lot about the benefits of a short rotation with Yangyang, being the fact that you can just get into your DPS so quickly and still get the buffs from sets like Moonlit Clouds, and then Sanhua, much like Yangyang, also gives 20% attack because of her S6. Sanhua and Yangyang are very similar in many ways, but the reason Sanhua is better is because her outro skill gives an incredibly valuable damage buff, being basic attack damage amplification. Now, damage amplification outro skills are obviously the strongest type of outro skills, and basic attack damage is also an archetype that is being used by quite a good amount of characters. Sanhua is best in slot for Phoebe, as well as Encore, and she is at the very least a top 3 character for Carlotta, Camellia, Havoc Rover, Sheng Liao, and even GN. If there's a DPS that doesn't have like 3 incredible buffers, chances are Sanhua is at least a top 3 character to use with them. Calling her only a Camellia bot is just kind of absurd, because that's far from true. I didn't even consider every single Sanhua team, because she's also used in hypercarry Brant as well as double intro Changli setups. Sanhua just has so many advantages within her kit that not talking about her in this video would just be kind of criminal. Within the theory crafting community, Sanhua is insanely respected, and it's for good reason. A combination of an insanely short field time, a very exploitable swap cancel window, and also buffing through her S6 just makes her such a good character, and then adding on top of that she's also the best generalist basic attack buffer in the game just means that Sanhua has way more value than people give her credit for. Moving away from the 4 stars a bit, it's time to talk about a 5-star. Not a limited one though, a standard banner 5-star, which is Encore. Encore is actually a very good DPS character, which a lot of people seem to undermine for reasons that are just straight up wrong. You see, back during 1.0, the most common way to play Encore would be with a heavy amount of swap cancelling, primarily through the use of either Sanhua or Yinlin, and then the introduction of Changli only solidified that reputation. But Encore's talent as a hyper carry, just fully utilizing Sanhua's buff, is something that people never really realized. Encore was seen as a hard to use character for an incredibly long amount of time, as well as the fact that people think that she's just worse than other limited DPS characters when it comes to her overall damage output. But even in a hypercarry team with Sanhua, Encore has been capable of putting out numbers that are able to compete with limited 5-stars like GN. Encore, being a standard banner character, is not really thought about much, but she's still genuinely solid, and can still easily clear all the content that's in the game right now, including Whimpering Wastes. There truly is not much to say about Encore other than, well, have you ever tried playing hypercarry with Sanhua? And chances are most people that say that she's hard to play haven't. It really is just as simple as doing a regular 1-2-3 rotation with Sanhua, and then using Encore's basic attacks and using her skill whenever it's off cooldown. It's just that simple. But staying on the theme of DPS characters that people underrate, it's time to talk about Havoc Rover. And I think that Havoc Rover has even more advantages to them than Encore. Let me explain. The Havoc Rover had quite an interesting story, because here's the thing. They released with a maximum of S2, and at S2, the Havoc Rover is a pretty decent character. By today's standards, they wouldn't be anything to write home about. But ever since the release of Renacida, and especially 2.1 because of finally unlocking S6, Havoc Rover's damage has raised up on heights that people didn't really think that Havoc Rover was capable of. Their damage might have been lower than other characters in the past, but not anymore. Because S6 is now available, Havoc Rover's damage has successfully caught up and is capable of even competing with Camellia, who is a very respected DPS character. So the fact that people think that Havoc Rover's damage is lower than that of the average limited DPS is not really true anymore. People also think that the Havoc Rover is hard to play, which isn't really true. The main barrier when it comes to skill is simply known to double intro on Havoc Rover for extra forte generation. And that's not really a gameplay check, that's just a knowledge check. Being able to do the double intro means that you don't have to grind up any forte and can just easily start smashing. Their rotation is also incredibly simple. Just start off with the skill, then enter Umbra mode, do 5 basics, skill, 5 basics, ult, 5 basics, echo. Sure, you can get interrupted during this combo, but as long as you keep the general timing in mind for when you should skill or ult, you should be completely fine. You don't even need to time your skill that well. The only thing that could even be remotely tight is using the echo within 5 seconds of using the liberation. But, my mans, you have a 5-second window. If you're not hitting that, I don't know what you're doing. And then the final misconception is that people think that Sanhua is actually the Havoc Rover's best teammate, which isn't true, because the next character we are going to be talking about is Danjin. Now, Danjin and Rover were a dynamic duo as far back as 1.0, because of the double Dreamless tech, but ever since that got patched, people didn't really look at this comp as much, other than the die-hard Danjin players. But even then, it was still a strong combo, and now that Havoc Rover is as strong as they are, Danjin is even better with them. The reason that Danjin is better than Sanhua for the Havoc Rover is because a lot of Havoc Rover's damage comes through the form of Dreamless as well as the Resonance Liberation, and the Resonance skill also does a large amount of damage. These are all things that Sanhua cannot buff with her Ultra skill, but Danjin can. The rest of their buffs are the same, being 20% attack from S6, as well as whatever supportive set you're deciding to run. But if you run Midnight Veil on this support, Danjin is able to take more advantage of it than Sanhua because her damage is actually Havoc, as opposed to Sanhua being a Glacio character. This is even further amplified by the fact that Danjin just does a lot of damage. People seem to majorly underrate her damage per rotation, but she is capable of pushing out more than 250,000 damage within 6 seconds, which means that her overall damage per second, at least during her field time, is higher than Sanhua. And now, while her buff isn't as universal as Sanhua's, making her a worse character overall, she does way more damage than Sanhua ever could. People also seem to think that Danjin is hard to use, which isn't true. Danjin's combo is actually pretty simple. If you decide to use her intro skill, you literally just do the intro, 2 E's, free basics, and then free E's, and then your heavy attack. That's it, you're done. It's not a hard combo to learn. And while you can be interrupted when doing your free basic attacks, Danjin actually gets a lot of damage from her dodge counters, so enemies attacking you is genuinely a positive for her. She also drains her own HP, which a lot of people find problems with. But Danjin's Forte Heavy Attack actually heals her more than her skills drain her HP, and while there's still a risk of death during Danjin's field time, it's way less than people like to say it is, especially when a character like Shorekeeper exists, just healing your entire team way more than any other healer in the game. But that's just my thoughts. Who do you think is the most underrated character in Wuthering Waves? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, be sure to join my Discord, which is linked in the description. You can ask any questions in the help channel there, and since I'm pretty active in my Discord, I'll probably be able to answer your question. But that'll be it from me. Peace.